we had this isn't foremost, by the way. I just want to talk about it. The rumor on Christmas from Woj that James Harden would seriously consider a return to the Houston Rockets in free agency this year. The timing of that was weird because it was Christmas. The Sixers are like on a tear, and Harden's been playing well. Joel Embiid has been playing well, and so it doesn't really, when you think about it, make sense about the timing, and also just having the, it wasn't a throwaway line, but it was in a throwaway spot. It was at the end of the Woj article where it said that the working relationship between Joel Embiid, Doc Rivers, and then James Harden is this like not is unfinished, is a work in progress, implies that it's not great. That's like, it's not a 5 alarm fire, but that's pretty notable here. And so I first interpreted it as, well, this is max contract leverage for James Harden. He took a discount to stay in Philly, ensure they get PJ Tucker and Daniel House this year, help grease the wheels of that D'Anthony Melton trade, and then working with within the hard cap, excuse me, for that. So that was my first instinct. And I do think there might be an element of play where that idea would be floated around out there. But then I thought about it, got to talking with Red Nation Hoops' Salman Ali, and this doesn't feel like it necessarily would have come from Harden because the timing's so weird. Free agency is so far away that you're not gaining like a ton of leverage here. This feels like something that gets out, maybe because you don't have a concrete specific agent, as far as we know, sort of handling your things behind the scenes. And there's going to be no one in league circles really invested in keeping that under wraps or your interest there. And so it feels like, I don't know if it was a mistake or just this has been out there. Apparently, it was not something that I was privy to, but now I've just been told that it's just been out there for quite some time. And it did mention, which gives it legitimacy, by the way. I think it was Jake Fisher. I can't remember if he was a Bleacher Report at the time, but he's at Yahoo Sports now. Had mentioned that that was something Harden had considered or looked at over the offseason, the ties to Houston, really missing Houston. And we all know that he has ties beyond the strip club jokes to Houston. Like, that is a place where he signed multiple extensions instead of going to free agency. He had I don't want to say he was the run of the organization. He was the top priority in the organization. They tailored a lot around him, and rightfully so. He had cachet there. Would he have the same cachet if he goes back? We'll get into that in a second. I buy into the rumor, though. The timing is just weird, and I don't know that it's consequential. And there's a lot of basketball left to be played, and you'd rather focus on that. Harden himself said everything's well in Philly. We have to see how the playoffs end. We have to see what they're willing to do for him in free agency. Again, I think the idea could be sort of a leverage play from Harden, but the timing doesn't imply that that's what this was. It implies that this is something that has been out there, that is real, that he will look at it and weigh maybe his happiness outside of basketball or just in tandem with basketball and in general, other than the best spot that he would be able to win a championship right now, which you look at Houston's roster, and yes, they have Jalen Green, they have Alperen Sengun, they have Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason's fucking fantastic. You throw Harden on there, and they could just basically sign him outright. Their cap space is, if they're going to get rid of the Eric Gordon hold, which, by the way, something that's been theorized among me and others is maybe that's why Eric Gordon just hasn't been traded yet. He's a James Harden homie. And if you have him there, maybe that's another reason for James Harden to come back. Perhaps you don't pay him the full boat of his salary that's non-guaranteed next year, but you could still bring him back anyway. If you insert James Harden into that team, and let's say Eric Gordon is there, they're not immediately a contender. And we've seen this movie before where if a player says, no, I'm happy to play with the youngsters and come back, and we're going to win a title and we'll build up there, James Harden's going to turn 34. It's not happening. Maybe if he wins a title in Philly and then just decides like, hey, it's time to go back to Houston, perhaps there's a level of contentment there. But if you sign James Harden, there's an implicit level of urgency. And so you're going to look at trading this year's pick, wherever it lands. And then you also know the Rockets are probably going to want to try and win anyway because they owe their 2024 pick to OKC with top 4 protection. That urgency is already caked in. Harden is only going to accelerate that. And so you're going to look at trading for at least one other major player. And this could be a Kawhi, Paul George situation on the older scale where James Harden is coming with somebody. Kevin Durant, MVP candidate right now. Things are hunky-dory in Brooklyn. Doesn't stay that way leading into the offseason, depending on what happens with Kyrie Irving's own free agency. Who knows? Maybe that's the guy that comes with James Harden. And you have the assets to make it happen. Because you have extra picks from Brooklyn themselves, that would actually be hysterical if some of those picks are going back to the Nets in that deal. But you also have a bunch of these youngsters, and that would be the other thing I would bring up. If you're getting James Harden, I would be floored, flabbergasted, shocked if Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Alperen Şengün, plus next year's first round pick are all just there next season. There will be a consolidation trade. I think you can argue the Rockets need a consolidation trade as is. You just wouldn't be like, oh, let me trade Şengün and Jabari Smith or Jalen Green or Eason. Those guys I think would be considered off limits. It's, oh, like, do we turn Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba into something? Kevin Porter Jr. salary this upcoming summer. Maybe we look at moving. You're going to look at more of a wholesale consolidation here, though. And I don't love the fit between Harden and Green. You need to set up your defense in a very, very specific way, especially if you want them to play with Şengün. This isn't to say that players wouldn't be available out there. What's going on in Toronto? Would OG be available this summer? I'd probably bet against it. But could Siakam? That might be an interesting one. That would be a name that would fit the bill. But if you're going to get a Siakam, I don't want to use that, even if you're going to get an OG Anunoby, you're not going to go after a Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine. That doesn't make sense because you have James Harden. Would you go after you're not going to go after a Karl Anthony Towns. That's just, that wouldn't make too much sense in that scenario with Jalen Green and James Harden in the fold, unless you're going to give up Jalen Green as part of that deal, to sort of, maybe Towns is best suited as your number 3 option, but you're still going to have to build out a really specific defense. And so I just don't think he would be like your primary aim if that's someone that's going to be floating around the open market. An actual name that maybe springs to mind, like, some people still want to bounce around Jaylen Brown. I just can't see it because the Celtics are so good. Maybe if the Clippers decided to blow it up after this year, but I don't really know that they would do that either. Jimmy Butler, is that someone who would want to play with James Harden if things kind of go south in Miami this year? Bam Adebayo would make the most sense, but he's just not going to become available. But a player like a star that's going to become available, you're going to need to give up stuff to get stuff. And that would be, I think you would try and press to keep Jalen Green the most, but that would be your first round pick this year on the table. And then having to decide, all right, are we willing to part with Jabari Smith? Maybe on a smaller scale, trying to decide, well, do we part with Eason and or Şengün as part of this deal, in addition to just, other throw-ins, future picks? It depends on the player. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying, oh, okay, Wendell Carter Jr. became available, you have to trade Jabari Smith and your pick. No, that's not. It would have to be a higher end talent who becomes available. Kevin Durant would certainly qualify there. So that's a move the Rockets will make if they get Harden. And that's why I believe they could be reticent to make it happen. At the same time, I absolutely believe, given their own pick commitments to OKC coming up, given the cap space they have, they would absolutely sign James Harden if he wants to go there, and they'll figure out the rest later. Maybe they try and buy a gap year. Again, I wouldn't expect it. Are they a team that just gets in on the LeBron James sweepstakes if Harden wants to go to Houston? Is that just the next pairing? LeBron, who could be traded this summer, and then James Harden in Houston. I don't love the idea of short-circuiting the rebuild that much. I just wouldn't put it past the Rockets to consider it. And I think you get out of that deal if you're signing Harden outright. You get out of that deal while not having to gut your entire youthful asset base. Like LeBron at this point, because of the size of his contract, his age, I think the return on LeBron James would be lower than a lot of people would expect after seeing what Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell got. And maybe most people wouldn't. I think most reasonable people wouldn't expect LeBron to command that much in the trade market. Maybe Kevin Durant does. I ultimately think the star trade market's going to settle a little bit, that there was sort of this overcorrection with the way and the timing and the cavalierness with which teams are willing to give up future first-round picks right now. Those distant first-round picks are drying up because so many teams have already traded them. And I also think that you're looking at what's happening in Minnesota right now. Talk about a borderline dumpster fire. Teams are going to be a little bit more cognizant of, hey, whoa, we need to pump the brakes here. And so we'll see some pullback on the star trade market, especially when that star is pushing 40 in LeBron James. And, he could wind up being a rental if he really wants to play with Bronny when he enters the league. And so you're looking at having him for 2 years, let's say. How does he age then? And does he stick around beyond that? But my point being here is, if you get James Harden, it's not to just be a part of this rebuild in Houston. He's not going to Houston with the idea of being a part of the rebuild. He loves Houston, and I think his ties to the organization, to the city, are underrated, get overlooked, lost in the memes about strip clubs, which are, those are funny, but there's real emotional ties there. This is real to me, and that's with the Sixers kind of looking like an actual contender of late, and they're going to get Tyrese Maxey back, which is huge for them. And Tobias Harris has been playing really well. Their defense has perked up and I think has room to actually even improve still. So that team is a real threat. But if James Harden's not happy and he misses Houston, and it seems like he does just based off the reporting that was there after he left Houston in the first place, this is real. This could happen. And I don't know whether you would endorse it as a Rockets fan. If you're a Rockets fan listening to this, watching this, comment, let me know if you would want James Harden back as like really back, not come back with a year left in his career to retire, but you want him to come back, be part of what's ever happening here, or you're willing to fashion a more urgently competitive team around him or with him, so long as you get to keep, let's say you get to keep one player or one asset here if you're really that married because you're in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. What how are you fleshing out like what is the goal here? Is it to try and keep two of this year's pick, Jalen Green and Jabari, while also acquiring a star? Is that feasible? I don't know, maybe. That would probably be my preference. If you can keep two of those guys, this year's pick, Jabari and Jalen Green, I'm a lot more open to the Harden idea. I'm open to it now, quite frankly, but like I'll be a lot more open to it then. So James Harden stuff, that's a real threat. This is going to be a fascinating way to play out in 6 months. If you're Houston, there's nothing you could really do unless you need to back channel some tampering or figure out what stars are going to be available this summer that you could try to pair with James Harden. You sit tight at this point. Do what you're doing right now. Maybe continue to up Şengün's usage. They've run a lot more stuff through him since Thanksgiving. Been good to see. Took them too long to get there. But look, bring your young guys along. I don't know what to do with Eric Gordon in this situation. If you view him as mission critical to getting Harden and you want to keep him, fine. I don't know that you're getting a first round pick for him alone anyway right now. But there's nothing for them to do. This is more of a let's see how the Philly season ends. Let's see how James Harden season ends. Let's see what happens in the postseason specifically. It's a very weighted out, which is why the timing I don't think was in service of James Harden necessarily.